I'm starting a new painting today, and I've got a few blues, colours like this to do a lighthouse, and it is actually New Brighton Lighthouse in Merseyside. So I've mixed up some of the blues, different shades, and I always try them out first. I test them on the same paper. It's really important that you test it on the same paper. So I've got a light blue, a mid blue, and a slightly darker one. I'll have a quick slurp of my coffee because this is a very big piece of work, and yeah, I need to take a deep breath. So I'm going to wet all the backgrounds. So it's going to be wet in wet. I'm going to do the sky, and you'll see some of the problems that I come up against. This is not a problem as such, but because of the lighthouse being white, then I need to work around it. I'm going to speed this up so that you don't all fall asleep. It's a big enough and simple enough shape to work around. I mean, you could use masking fluid, but I'm not overly fond of that. So just wet it thoroughly. You'll see that I'm wetting it over and over again, different ways. You don't want any dry bits, otherwise the paint won't cover it. And then start to apply your paint. Now you need to work relatively quickly, so if the phone were to ring or somebody were to knock on the door, you'd have to ignore it, because it all needs to be done while it's still wet. And this is the reason that I make it very wet, because I've got to get around the lighthouse, and with a little brush I'm just going to cut in here. So this takes a little bit of time. So just cut in with the same colour and then spread that out into the background. You're doing this but being aware that your picture is drying all the time, so it does need to be really wet. It's better to be too wet than not wet enough. And then you carry on, so hopefully it's still wet enough, and it is. Adding more colour, and I'm going to come in a little bit darker now. I want there to be a feel of a storm brewing. So I'm coming in with this darker colour now. Still being really quick, so don't mess about, just get the colour on. Now what I'm doing here is that I'm thinking all the time of the problems and how I'm going to solve them, and I want there to be a big wave coming in from the right. And as a watercolourist, you wouldn't normally use white, so you have to save the paper. So you have to be thinking all the time. And I'm just going to cut in again on this other side. Most of the colours I use are non-staining, so you can get paint off if you put it somewhere where you don't want it. Now what I've noticed now is that as the paper is drying, and you see I've got like a white area there because the paper is stretched and will dry flat, but when it's wet it creates like these hills and valleys, if you like, and you need to run it out of the valleys. So I'm going to tip it and be patient and let the paint run out of that little ridge. You see it's all running at the side, so that's how wet it still is. And then I'm going to add a little bit of salt, which will give a nice effect, which you'll see in a little bit, just along the edge. Once again, you've got to think of the problems. If it's too dry, then it won't work, and if it's too wet, it won't work. So while I'm waiting for that to do its stuff, then I'm just going to fill in this little bit at the top of the lighthouse, because it would obviously be made of glass and you would see the sky through it, so it would be a similar shade. In fact, that little bit I've done there is probably a bit dark. I'll just lift a little bit of that off in a minute. And while I've been doing that, it started to collect again. So you've got to look at all the different things that are happening in the picture at the same time. And I say to students, it's like tapping your head and rubbing your tummy. You need to be aware of everything that's going on and keep watching how dry it is, whether the salt's working, etc. And have a plan. It's all in the planning. We'll give it a little shake there to try and speed it up, which doesn't work at all, but it makes me feel better. And just be patient. Okay, so you can see that the salt has worked really nicely there, but here comes the next problem. There is no way that that wave will create those little marks as high up as that. That'll be more like a tsunami. So what can I do about that? Well, I've got a few options. So I've been a bit sloppy with where I've put the salt. I could crop it, and that would be about the right position, but I've still got the same problem. And actually, to get rid of that problem and move it over to get rid of those salt sparkles, if you like, then the lighthouse is too near the centre. It's not good composition, and it loses impact anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually paint over and reapply some paint over those areas, which is really risky. Now, if you were to use a brush with water now, you would lift all that paint, because I've already mentioned I use non-staining paints. So the best thing to do is to spray it with water. And I spray a much bigger area than I want, put plenty on. That way you're not touching the paint, and then when you do apply it with the brush, you be really careful. Now, I quite like that little light circle that there is there. It almost looks like there's a bit of sun trying to get through. So I'm going to try and save that. I've gone over these little sparkly bits that I don't want. And it's always risky. The whole thing could fail, but it's worth having a go because I wouldn't be happy with it as it was. So I'm going to tip it. You can see it running, but it's not running exactly the way I want. So I'm going to use the spray bottle again, and I'm going to encourage it to flow the way I want. So you tip your board so the water is running the right way. And I think I probably got away with that. And then I'm just using a tissue just to take off any dribbles, but I'll be able to neaten that up so much more later, because as I've already mentioned, I use non-staining colours, so I will be able to lift some of this paint off. In fact, I'm going to do a little bit of that here. It doesn't show up very well on this video, but you just get a stiff brush and just do circular movements with water and then take it off with a tissue. So any bits that have gone onto the lighthouse, you'll be able to get those off. Then while the painting is all drying, I'm going to start the wave on this right hand side. And I can see already that I've got another problem, and it's something that I've not thought about. So I want there to be a wave going over the front of the lighthouse, and really I should have rubbed out the pencil lines of that door because I don't think I'm going to need those. But if you put paint over the top of those lines, then you won't be able to rub them out. So now I've already started, I'm thinking that I'm just going to carry on, but just keep the paint away from that area for now. Then I would allow it to dry and then reapply the paint after I've rubbed out those lines. That was totally my fault. I should have done that first. Now I'm using some brown colours here because I'm trying to create the feel of like the sand being whipped up from the bottom of the sea, or mud or whatever. It'll be sand, wouldn't it? So that's what I'm trying to recreate, but I'm keeping away from this door, or I'm not putting much paint over that at all. Now all the time I'm thinking, as I'm working, thinking about the shapes of the wave. How is it going to look? Where should I put the paint? I sometimes talk to myself, I ask myself questions, and that's all part and parcel of painting. That's fine. And then I'm going to come in with a darker colour. to create some shadowed areas underneath this large wave. It doesn't look like much at the moment, but today I'm just trying to get the foundations of a painting, and then I can leave it overnight to dry and come back fresh to it and carry on. Just going to darken this little bit up here. And then I've wet on the other side as well. And it stands to reason that if you've got like a brownie colour on one side of the lighthouse, then it's going to reappear at the other side. So it needs to be consistent. And I'm going to carry on doing this across the rest of the picture. Just adding the same colours but different areas to try and create the feeling of crashing waves. You can see that that's what I'm left with.